everyone, my name is David Yu. I'm a graduating senior at Carnegie Mellon University studying business and computer science. I'm going to be working at Google after college as an associate product manager.
If you were trying to build something related to food, what would you build?
Yeah, great question. So I guess I can start and go through my process as well as I go through this question. And I think that'll help me both determine what I want to go about for solving this question and help other people out to determine how I think about this problem and how I want to refine your question to, better scope it out in a way that would, I would answer in a realistic setting as well. So I guess the first thing I'd like to go is that usually when you're starting on a question like this, the question you asked me is build a product around food. Now, this is very high level, which means that there's so many directions to go with it. A lot of people coming in for a question like this will be like, oh, I'm so scared. There's so much going on. How do I break it down into something that's more manageable, more tangible, and more realistic for me to answer in a 30-minute setting? So I think for me, when you say build a product around food, immediately the first thing I think of is some type of kitchen equipment. For me, I'm really big into chef knives and figuring out how you can determine what best equipment you need to use to be able to better, improve your efficiency and operations in the kitchen. At least from my personal experience, that's an area that I think is a huge benefit, is to have better equipment on that side. And, as with any good product that improves your operations, both for a B2B or a B2C, having the right tools is essential to improving yourself for the business or for the consumers as well. So I guess for my first step and for my background, that's an area that I think we would want to take a question like this. Does that sound good to you?
What other areas surrounding food have you considered before kind of looking at the kitchen equipment area?
Yeah, so I guess for food, if we want to start talking specifically at a higher level, maybe I would start and say, is there anyone you specifically want us to address this problem for? Are there any key stakeholders that you're looking at there? Is there any specific problem you would like me to solve related to food for this type of question that you're asking?
No, I don't have anyone in mind. I'm just curious how you think about the space before finalizing and focusing on kitchen equipment.
So I guess starting out in an actual interview setting, I think I would focus on first determining a key user first and figuring out, starting out and seeing perhaps a series of key users, and then going through a series of questions to determine which of those key users we would want to focus on for this interview. And then once determining what that key user is, going through and listing a few key pain points for those types of users to then, determine what the solution may be for that end. Is that kind of the direction you're looking for?
Yeah. So before we pick a key user, what areas come to mind when it's food related? So for example, it could be people going out to eat. It could be people cooking at home. It could be people working at restaurants, in all kinds of different aspects surrounding food. It could be pizza delivery, right? Which of these areas do you think is the most impactful given, let's focus on the US, right? Let's narrow it down. Given what we know about US and how people eat, which aspect of food and eating do you think is most impactful? It could also be around like grocery shopping. That is another area that is related to food.
Yeah, I think for me then personally, the area that would be most impactful for me is probably like kitchen work. So the key users being those people who work and like prepare the food at restaurants, at different establishments there in order for those key customers on that end. So that's like a key user segment that I think we could probably focus on for this problem.
Okay, let's do that.
Okay, so I think for this specific user group, there are a couple of key pain points I think we would want to address and highlight to determine how we want to, supposedly build a product for food. For the current service worker journey that they go through, there's a lot of back end work and prep work to be able to, create a large scale restaurant and be able to prepare food for hundreds, if not thousands of people, right? There's a lot of manual labor involved on a lot of different ends. And for them specifically, there's a whole process of making sure that you have the right food and groceries come at the right time, right? Because you have your ordering forms that you prepare, and then you want to make sure that everything along those lines are prepared well. On the other hand, you also have the customer service and hospitality side, more of the kind of like the front facing work that's required. And I think problems along those lines specifically come around making sure that you have good customer service guidelines, making sure that you have a strong hospitality service there, and making sure that you have a good line of communication between back of the house and front of the house as well. Is this kind of the direction you'd like to see us go? Is there something else you'd like me to focus on?
Can you just quickly remind me again, why is focusing on this segment impactful?
Yeah, of course. So I think if we look at it from a purely industry perspective, the restaurant industry hospitality industry as a whole is like a $1 trillion industry. And because of such, we think that this user group has a lot of problems that they face on a daily basis that we think a new type of product would potentially be able to solve as well. I think, is there a specific area, a specific criteria we want to look for when we determine our key user groups? Is there a monetization play we're looking at here? Is this like an accessibility play? Is there a key kind of metric or a framework you'd like me to focus on when determining why we want to focus on this user group over another?
I'm thinking maybe reach.
Reach.
So, for example, if we solve problems for the service worker, what impact would that then have on the surrounding community around this service worker? So if we fix the problem, what happens after that? That is what I mean by reach and impact.
I see. Yeah, thank you for the clarification. I think the impact there is that because, everyone has to eat, everyone goes to restaurants, and I think being able to build a product for service workers has a significant compounding effect for the people around them. I don't know specifically numbers wise how we'd quantify that, but just to give a little bit of an estimation, here for CMU, for example, for the work that I did for Capital Grains, we had roughly 12 members on my team where we worked together to do culinary work on that end. And we were able to impact roughly around 600 students every weekend or so. So with that, if we were to compound that to a national level as well, we could expect a similar thing there. Where it's like you have an impact for like each one service member you may be able to help, perhaps the impact that they would be able to help other people, either through improvements in efficiency, improvements in their logistics or operations, probably would be around 50-fold.
And what type of, this is great that you have personal data point that we can anchor on. What was the impact that the 600, was it 600 students at CMU? What was the impact that they experienced?
Yeah, so for them, they were able to get a good meal out of the money that they have, either through like their dining plan on campus or through their credit card. And I think for them, obviously, the main pain point that we were trying to solve with all that restaurant was to provide like a healthy meal. And I think what we were able to showcase with that initiative and with that program was that we were able to, acquire market share on the weekend on-campus dining experience by selling a product that people, wanted to eat. And I think though the impact isn't as big as say, like building out a, huge new product that'll revolutionize their business or anything, that 1 hour, one meal difference makes a huge difference when you have a lot of like TA work, a lot of assessments, a lot of assignments on campus, and you need some type of product to keep you going and keep you fueled for the experience.
Great. So if I were to kind of summarize that impact, it's then affecting the 600 students sentiment on their experience while attending CMU, right? With healthier food in a kitchen that is running very efficiently, their overall experience at CMU is improved. What does that mean? Let's take a step further, right? What happens when the students are happy? Then when they're feeling their best, they're performing their best. When they are eating healthy food, they're able to show up to their classes and learn and do a good job and, achieve their goals, right? And then what does that mean? It means now we have brand loyalty. Now we want everyone to go to CMU, right? So that is a ripple effect. So this impact is now that we think about it, this impact is not just about making the kitchen workers work in a more efficient way. It has a ripple effect. And that's why it's important to think about not just first degree type of impact, but second and third degree. And then what is that feedback loop? What is that flywheel? That's all signals that go into how well do you understand and how are you thinking about this problem space? Okay, so now we're really high up there, right? Now we're talking about like student sentiment and like brand loyalty. Now let's come back down. Great. Let's focus on the kitchen worker. What pain points and like what is your journey like?
Yeah, I can definitely go into this. So in terms of like the user journey currently for the service worker, for someone on my team for this semester, one of the main things that they have to go through is a lot of specifically with prep work, right? On Fridays and Saturdays when we have to prep for our service for Saturday, there's a lot of equipment involved, there's a lot of people involved, and there's like a whole list of tasks that we have to go through, right? And right now, currently, the process for us and for a lot of people go through this, it's very manual, and there's not really a tech element to it. There's not really a product in place to make sure that that whole process goes smoothly and that every step is well done. That's like one key pain point that I think is a major highlight, at least from my experience, and that my team has talked to me about. A second major pain point for the service workers and for anyone running in the restaurant industry is certainly the produce, making sure that produce comes on time and the right produce comes on time. This is a huge problem within this industry because there's always supply chain logistics and always problems on all ends to make sure that food arrives at the right place at the right time. Because if it doesn't arrive at the right place, you don't have the food. If it doesn't arrive at the right time, it could potentially spoil, it could potentially have issues, and you obviously can't serve customers in that end. Another key thing I think for restaurant work as a whole is certainly the accounting and kind of like people management software there. So there's a couple of softwares that the industry uses regarding managing people and then managing finances there. So figuring out, because for most people in the restaurant industry, they aren't very tech literate. And most people don't have college degrees in that sense either. So it's important to build out technology that's very user accessible and very user friendly to make sure that if they're managing their staff or if they're managing their finances, that they're able to do so in a very seamless manner. I think on top of that, another pain point is labor scheduling, figuring out to make sure that you have enough people to work on the days that you need and to be able to potentially have an ability to go through and seamlessly track how many hours people are working and then determine, how much each person is getting paid as such, or if you need more people to work for that weekend as necessary. So these are a couple of like high level pain points, both in terms of the product as well as the people involved for this entire process. And I think just to kind of summarize it, first is focusing on the back end. So definitely figuring out which produce to order, when to order it, that's a key problem. The second one that I addressed was figuring out the prep work required, building out that entire process and making sure that all steps are done there to see if there's potentially any solution from a tech side to figure out and improve that process. The third one that I talked about was regarding the employee management process, figuring out if potentially there's any better way to better do the finances or management for employees there. And then finally, the fourth pain point that I talked about was regarding labor scheduling, to make sure that to help employers build a better platform to manage their employees and figure out their labor scheduling at that end. Is there anything you'd like me to go more in depth with there?
Would you say number one and number two are service worker facing? And then number three, like managing finances. And then number four, labor scheduling are service manager facing.
Yeah, good question. I think if we wanted to be more specific in this end, I think just potentially the service worker who are just focused on the operations, the management side for the third and fourth pain point that I addressed, for like the labor scheduling and the accounting and finances stuff, is not something that the service worker is going to be doing on that end. They're going to be more so doing the first two. So like figuring out how to order and when to order and making sure produce runs on time. And then a second thing being making sure that like when they have prep work required, that they have a nice schedule in place, so they make sure they get everything done on schedule as well.
Great. So are you suggesting that we focus on the worker facing aspect, the operational aspect, instead of the management aspects?
Good question. So I guess when we take a look at these key users, these two users in the service industry and their pain points, going back to the root kind of focus of this question, you wanted me to really focus on reach. And I think if we want to really tie this back into that, I think one question that comes to my mind as we go through this question as a whole is, which user do we want to focus on to maximize our reach for the most amount of people? And what I'm thinking from this problem is, okay, if you talk about the service manager or the employer, the owners of the restaurants, their reach is sure going to be on the community as a whole, on the customers, but that's usually through their employees, right? Through those service members. So if you have like a manager managing maybe 5 to up to 20 employees, their impact is primarily going to be on those 5 to 20 employees. On the flip side, if you look at the service workers themselves, what you'll see is that they are actually the ones that are customer facing. They're the ones actually prepping the food, actually serving the customers. And as such, they're the ones that have that additional reach and significant kind of have the ability to shape the customer's experience, whether, talking about my experience for Capital Grains on campus and helping those customers there and really like changing their weekend experience, or for any restaurant service member on that sense. So I think because of this analysis here, and because of kind of these two takeaways from these two user groups, I think it would be better and more fruitful for us to focus on the service members who are doing the operations, the prep work, and the ordering, rather than the service managers, in order to accomplish our end goal of maximizing our reach.
Yeah, that sounds great.
Okay. Yeah, so I guess now that we've kind of talked about this a bit further, I'd like to further dive into kind of the two key pain points that I talked about and see if there's potentially one we want to focus on based off of our solutions, our resources, anything there. So my first thought is, for any prep work required, there's currently, usually some process in place. Everyone does it slightly differently, but there's nothing really like centralized to be able to kind of go through and like make an actual checklist. Right now, the current process that we went through, and I think a lot of restaurant managers go through, is they make a spreadsheet, they make a checklist, and they kind of like check off each thing as they go along, whether it's like prepping some type of vegetables, cooking chicken or something along those lines, and then making sure that it's kind of like a play by ear kind of strategy, in the sense that there isn't really a very formal strategy there or a formal process in place. So I think that main pain point that I see arising from that is that, especially when there's a lot going on, it's very easy for the service member to get confused, and most importantly, to get overwhelmed.
Yeah.
When you're juggling 20 different ingredients at a time, it's very easy to miss one thing, and then that can cause a whole backlog for both yourself and your team. So that's kind of like one key major aspect of that pain point there. And then the second one that I like to focus on and then determine which one we really want to dive into for a solution is for the ordering process for the service members, making sure that, currently the way that a lot of companies do it is they have like a partner, whether it's like Cisco Food Services or another like middle food services provider who makes sure that, they get their produce on time. And there's not currently a process of clear transparency or communication. It can be frustrating for the service members to be able to go through and know exactly when food is going to arrive and where it's going to arrive because of that lack of transparency. So I think that's a major pain point that we could potentially come up with solutions for that user journey as well.
Do you see pain points around planning for the produce that they're ordering? Because now we're talking about they have transparency on when the food is arriving, but then someone has to order. Someone has to figure out what to order and how much and by when. Like you need to place the order and then you receive it, right? Is there a pain point around planning what to order? And planning is also like a big area in itself. To plan, you need to have an expectation on demand. How do we know how many students are coming to this cafe? How do we know how much to order? We don't want to waste, etc. Right? So how do you think about that?
Yeah, that's a great question, and that's a problem that I actually face, every week for Capital Grains as well, is figuring out how much of each ingredient to order. And there's also currently, it's very much so you look at some historical data, you look at some type of factors such as weather, such as big events happening here and there on campus, but specifically for planning and ordering, more or less, it's basically like a guess and check kind of strategy. There's very little ability to be able, because there's so much fluctuation and so much volatility within this market, to determine how much food to buy in order to make sure that you maximize the amount of food you can make for your customers while making sure you don't stock out, while also minimizing the amount of waste and potential leftover because you bought too much and food's going to spoil.
Yeah, imagine your cafe doesn't have food and you have hungry students.
Yeah,
that's bad, right? All right, so I love these pinpoints. And just as a side note, I always shoot for 3, if possible, because there's something about the number 3 that people kind of just gravitate to. And so this is not the interviewer talking, this is just the friend talking here. If possible, always shoot for 3. 3 segments, 3 pain points, 3 solutions, etc. Okay, now putting back the interview hat. All right, so now that we have 3 pain points, do you have other pain points that you want to talk about?
Yeah, I certainly think that, if we had hours on end, there's a lot more that I could talk about. But I think for this interview and for our focus here, these are the 3 pain points that I like to focus on. And I think what we would want to do now is kind of choose one of these pain points to focus on. And then I'll probably try to come up with maybe like 3 creative solutions on that. And I think that would probably be the best approach. I guess from talking about more specifically of my experience as well, I think that process usually works, having that back and forth between the interviewer and interviewee, because I think having that keeps it like more conversational as well, and then keeping them engaged to make sure that like you have a better sense of what I'm actually talking about, because sometimes it's very easy to get carried away with my own thoughts as well there.
Totally, yes, always keep the conversational if possible.
Okay, so coming back to the 3 pain points, just to highlight what we just talked about, the first one was regarding the ordering. The second one was regarding prepping. And the third one was regarding planning. So looking at these 3, if we're going to be going back to the high level problem that we want to solve, which is how do we maximize our reach for this solution? What I first think about is which of these 3 pain points causes the most pain for our key user in the sense, right? Which one takes the most time? Which one costs the most amount of money? Which one causes the most pain, quote unquote? And when I look at these 3, the main key metric I'm looking at to improve is probably going to be either something with money, either reducing cost, or with time, reducing the amount of time required to prep for there. And that's a trade-off because, you know, a solution for one thing is probably not going to be a solution for another pain point in the sense. For these three key problems and three key pain points that we addressed, my rationale is that the planning phase is actually going to be the most cumbersome, primarily because of the significant volatility within the amount that one person can order. For example, if your cafe is doing really well and you need to order like 10, 25 pound bags of coffee beans, you want to make sure that you have enough for the 1,000 customers that come through. But let's say, you know, it's raining that day and, you know, your number of customers decreases by like 50%. Well, you have like half of your coffee bags left over. And, you know, that's something you need to account for your costs there. That's like kind of one area that I'm thinking about in terms of the key pain points there and why I think that may be a key focus. But before I, you know, go too much into that, I'd like to give a few key supporting arguments for the other two to make sure that this is the one that's the most valuable to go down. Is that okay with you?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. So for the other two, for the ordering, the key pain point that for the prepping work, the key pain point that we see there is probably regarding time, right? You know, all the produce is already here. You have this much to prepare. You also need to figure out how much of that produce you actually need to make. For example, if we go back to the cafe example and you need to make, you know, like 10 trays of brownies, you need to know how much of each ingredient you need to be able to make that as well. Yeah. And though it's very easy to, you know, have some set recipe in place, there's still that scalability issue to making sure that you have, you know, if you're making like one thing, if you're making 10 things, how you're able to scale up your solution for the number of users or for the number of customers that you expect in this setting. But compared to the other problem, this still doesn't seem as, you know, big of a reach component, because if we go back to that balance between time and money, one of the big things, and I think one of the prioritizations that we see for the service member is that they obviously want to help improve their bottom line as well. And the best way to do that, I think the trade-off between the product cost and the labor cost for the service member here is probably going to be higher. The trade-off being that the product costs are likely going to be higher, considering that if we talk about it from like a cafe's perspective, you know, it's likely that they have to order like hundreds of pounds of some ingredient in order to be able to maintain operations, which can fluctuate significantly. Whereas on the other hand, for their prep work, the amount of work for that specific worker may fluctuate between like 1 or maybe like 3 or 4 hours at most. So if you look at that trade-off in terms of a pure cost metric, that because for the time side, we can still change that to our root metric being money. Yeah. The labor hours would probably be in tens, maybe hundreds at most. But for the product cost, it could potentially be in the thousands or even higher, depending on the scale of the operation as well.
Makes sense.
Okay. And then the final thing that we talked about was regarding the ordering process as well. And I think the ordering process goes much more with the planning process. So we can kind of combine those two pain points together. So I think looking at these two kind of key areas, then I think our main focus, just to summarize, is that, you know, there's a lack of, I guess to summarize the key pain point that we want to address going forward for this interview, there is a lack of information that service members face when they decide how much they need to order of different ingredients. It can be a very frustrating process because week on week demand fluctuates, and they need to make sure that they have enough food, satisfy demand, while making sure that they don't order too much food such that they have a lot of waste and spoilage left over. So that's kind of the key pain point I think we should focus on for the rest of this interview.
That sounds great.